Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose. And if you remember right, earlier this year there was a big controversy between Palworld and the Pokemon Company. At the time there was a lot of speculation that Nintendo would sue Palworld for some of its character designs that takes things maybe a little bit beyond just simple inspiration. However, despite Palworld's immense success, nothing ever really came from that, or at least until last night. Nintendo and the Pokemon Company finally officially brought the house down on Pocket Pair, and we will talk about all of that today and what this could possibly mean, not just for this case, but really for the entire game industry. Now, we will also talk about Square Enix because it sounds like they are just absolutely out on Sony and their exclusive deals. Let's just go and get right to things, though, starting off with PlayStation. They just announced a limited edition 30th anniversary PlayStation 5 collection, which you can see right here. I think at first glance, this looks really cool, and it is just packed with PlayStation 1 nostalgia. But I also have some problems with how they're handling this anniversary collection. I mean, first off, we don't have a price just yet, which I find that to be a little bit concerning. Now, maybe that just comes from the PlayStation 5 Pro reveal and its ridiculous price tag. That thing costs $700 without a disc drive. So it's a little scary to think about what they could possibly charge for this very special limited edition version, especially considering it's limited to just 12,300 units. And I think that there is my big problem with this collection. Like, it's a really cool idea on paper. I do like its design, but it's also meant to be a celebration for fans. Instead, what's going to happen here is that scalpers are the ones that are truly going to celebrate with just insane secondhand prices. Because I think the PS5 Pro version will be unobtainable for the majority that are actually interested. And that's a shame that true fans won't actually be able to celebrate. Now, what I will say, though, is that some of these other devices will be much easier to get, and I actually really do like these controllers. These are being sold separately as standalone devices. Again, we still don't have a price tag, but if you are interested in any one of these, pre-orders will go live on September 26th at PlayStation Direct. The PS5 Pro, PlayStation Portal, and the Edge controller will all be sold exclusively on PlayStation Direct, but the other items will go live at other retailers starting on October 10th. Okay, now speaking of the PlayStation 5 Pro, Digital Foundry just dropped a new video that highlights Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on the Pro versus the standard PS5. And, like I've been saying all along, it absolutely blows my mind that Sony didn't do this themselves. Because if there's any game that can showcase the need for a PlayStation 5 Pro, I would think that would easily be Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Its image quality on performance mode is a well-known blurry mess on the standard PlayStation 5. I mean, it's still a good game and everything, and they've improved it somewhat post-launch, but at the end of the day, it is still 100% a blurry mess. Well, thanks to Digital Foundry, we can now see secondhand that the PS5 Pro massively improves its image quality. They described it as a night and day difference, and when you see them side by side, they are absolutely correct. It actually looks good on the PS5 Pro. I mean, again, I am just absolutely baffled by how poorly Sony has advertised their new $800 console, which is already a tough sell as is. I mean, even with this big improvement for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, it's still a tough price to justify. But at the very least, it would have been something marketable, which is better than what I can say about its initial presentation. All in all, though, and I've said this a few times already, but I think as we draw closer to the PS5 Pro and with more hands-on impressions like this, it will get more positive reactions. Maybe not necessarily to justify its price for most people, but I think we will slowly understand its improvements as we get closer to its release. Now, moving on to our next topic, this also deals with PlayStation. Apparently, we just got a lot of PlayStation news today, which it somehow feels like each topic is both exciting to some extent, but also at the same time a little bit deflating. It just kind of feels like that's been a trend for PlayStation here recently. But nonetheless, if you're one of the three people who's been asking for a Horizon Zero Dawn remaster, well, apparently that's actually a legitimate thing that more than likely will be officially announced sooner rather than later. Another reason I say that is because an ESRB rating magically appeared online. As we've kind of learned these past few years, yeah, these rating boards and secrecy don't go in combination because they have single-handedly leaked more games than any leaker combined. You would think that they would have learned by this point, but honestly, I really don't think they care, nor do I think most people would care about this remaster. I'm really struggling to come up with a reason as to why a remaster like this needs to exist at all. You know, the original Horizon Zero Dawn released back in 2017, and it was already well ahead of its time graphically. And even more so, you can play it on the PlayStation 5 right now through backwards compatibility at 60 frames per second. So I don't really understand who this is being made for. It's not really old enough to introduce to a lot of new people, and the fans who already own it, they already have a good experience that they can play as is. So the way I look at this is, why use your precious resources to remaster something that really isn't needed or even requested in the first place? I mean, there's a lot of other remasters that fans do want. And if they're really just dead set on the PlayStation 4 library, well, I mean, you know, you have games like Bloodborne. I feel like that would have made a lot more sense. So I just don't understand what Sony is doing by this point. But hey, if you are interested in a Horizon Zero Dawn remaster, yeah, it looks pretty legitimate by this point. Now, I've also asked myself the same thing about Square Enix in the past. Just what exactly are they doing? Because if you've been following the channel for a while, you probably know that I've been critical over Square Enix's exclusive strategy, specifically when it comes to their big franchises. Not necessarily because I'm against exclusives, but rather because I think it's bad for their business and for their franchises in the long run. I mean, I said the same thing about Sega and Persona years ago, and hey, look at where they are today. Since Sega has committed to that more multi-platform approach, they have had a resounding amount of success. And I think that's the strategy that Square Enix needs to tailor suit to their own franchises as well. And after a painful lesson, they seemingly, finally, understand what I've been saying all along. In a new report that they just posted, Square Enix said this: "Here are our digital entertainment segment results. In the HD game sub-segment, we released multiple new titles, including major titles such as Final Fantasy XVI and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. But profits, unfortunately, did not meet our expectations." Now, how high are those expectations? That's a question that we do have to ask. But they did also mention Foam Stars as a letdown, and if there's one common trend with all three of these games, it's that they were all advertised as high-profile PlayStation exclusives. Now, okay, honestly, I don't really think Foam Stars would have had success no matter what, but considering it is a live service game, you know, it should have always been a multi-platform game from day one. There's really no excuse for a company the size of Square Enix to make a live service game exclusively for a singular platform. But what I will say is that all of this is important to understand because it does lean into the idea that Square Enix is just done with these exclusive deals with PlayStation, and here's the reason why. This strategy has been an embarrassing failure for Square Enix financially, and I think it's set their franchises back. Instead of growing the Final Fantasy franchise, one of their most important IP, instead of growing it across all platforms evenly, they instead alienated a large portion of the game community. They made PC fans wait for an extended amount of time well beyond that hype phase, and they completely left out Xbox. I mean, when it comes to Nintendo, I mean, there's that excuse that Switch couldn't handle these games anyways, but this strategy to lock these games down exclusively for PlayStation, it will impact Final Fantasy's long-term growth because now what happens is that these fan bases aren't as acclimated to this franchise as they should be. Now, the good news here, though, is that this is just the latest information that makes it clear as to why Square Enix is shifting away from this exclusive PlayStation strategy. They've already publicly mentioned that they will be a more multi-platform company going forward, and even earlier this year, they teased Final Fantasy XVI for Xbox. You can see here in an interview with Noisy Pixel, they said, Final Fantasy XVI is not over in the sense that we have the PC version. Once the PC version is released, we're thinking about hopefully moving to other platforms as well. However, that's not really talking about the story, it's more about moving it onto different platforms. So, I mean, yeah, it's likely only a matter of time before 16 gets its Xbox announcement, and I also wouldn't be surprised if the Switch successor gets at least Final Fantasy VII Remake. But looking onward after just the existing games, I think from this point forward, they will make sure to launch future Final Fantasy games across all platforms day one that are capable. I mean, even if you look at something like Astrobot, one talking point for that game is that games like Final Fantasy doesn't make an appearance. So it does kind of seem like Square Enix is distancing themselves from being viewed as this PlayStation-first studio. They truly want to be viewed as a multi-platform company, and I think that's going to be good for both Square Enix and for fans alike. Okay, now one last thing before we go. Nintendo is now officially targeting Palworld in its latest lawsuit. Yeah, I mean, we all know that Nintendo likes their lawsuits and everything, and, a lot of people have been waiting for this one since Palworld struck gold earlier this year. Nobody was really expecting Palworld to blow up the way that it did, but obviously it's now on Nintendo's radar, and that's not a good thing. What's really interesting about this lawsuit, though, is that it's not for the reason that you might expect. Apparently, this is a patent infringement lawsuit, which means they're not necessarily targeting Palworld's character design specifically. We actually so far don't know what these patent infringements are. Nintendo hasn't given us that information quite yet, but the way that I understand it is that these could be based on gameplay mechanics. Nintendo has patented game mechanics in the past, and we can actually use Zelda Tears of the Kingdom as one such example. This made news last year because they patented some really broad gameplay mechanics like its load screens and even physics for a character riding on top of a moving vehicle. So theoretically, if they patented similar things for Pokemon, like its capturing mechanics, then that might be their excuse to target Palworld. If that's true, though, that's a scary thought, because that could actually stifle creativity across the entire game industry. If Nintendo were to win something like this, if they took them to court over gameplay mechanics and they won, then what would happen is that a lot of these other big-time companies would suddenly patent a lot of their mechanics as well. So that could actually be problematic for the game industry, but, it's really hard to tell exactly what's going on here until we see what Nintendo has accused them of. And that is something that sticks out about this case. The fact that they waited this long kind of tells me that they spent a lot of time to actually build a case out. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have a strong case per se, but it could be a situation where they didn't like Palworld's character designs and how closely they resembled their own. And now what they're trying to do is they're just trying to use these patents as an excuse to bully a much smaller company in court with multiple accusations. It could be their way of not only punishing them, but also their way to scare off future competition from flying a little bit too closely to the sun, if you will. As we learn more, though, I'll give you more details, but based on the little information that we have so far, let me hear your thoughts about this in the comments below. This will be interesting to see how it plays out, if anything else. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode, but until next time, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and peace out.